Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about A Tunnel to Eden. This is the second full-length album by Philadelphia-based death metal band Alustrium. This comes out about 4 years after their 2011 debut, In Absence of Clarity. Alustrium play a style of progressive death metal with a little bit of everything thrown into it. Here you'll find these classic death metal riffs with a groovy, fast-paced and technical style, along with these blisteringly fast drums. There's also a large range of harsh vocals to be found. There's some deep and guttural vocals on the title track, there's a mid-range bark that's found throughout most of the album, and there's also the occasional high-pitched shriek in the style of Yari Maanpa on songs like Procreate Eviscerate. There's also a fair share of melodic guitar solos in the style of bands like Horrendous, except sped up about twice the speed. While their first album cemented their sound with this potpourri of different styles of death metal, they really come into their own with their sophomore album, creating this extremely solid and cohesive tech death album that was one of my favorites of 2015 and one of my favorite death metal albums in general. The performance here is extremely captivating with some really impeccable songwriting on top of it. The song flow is extremely notable throughout the album with lots of interplay between fast and slow parts, even within seconds of each other. What seem like these really disjointed ideas on their own are really brought together very well in a merciless barrage of heavy and intense instrumentation. The first three songs paint a pretty good picture of what can be found here. The title track, A Tunnel to Eden, starts it off with this foreboding symphonic piece, although that's the only time that symphonics are featured on this album, which transitions into this breakneck speed tech death similar to bands like Cryptopsy or the new Wormed album. It's finished off with this guitar solo that copies this theme from the intro that brings the whole song together very nicely. From there, the album goes into The Atheist Phenomenon, which is one of my favorite death metal songs ever. It starts off with this really intense and captivating passage with this spiraling guitar rhythm, and from there it takes this original idea and introduces little variations on it. There's this more melodic riff that it creates, and then it transitions into this really swirling guitar rhythm that explodes into an intense drum fill. And from there it goes into this crazy ripping solo, and all this is in the first minute and a half of the song. It continues on like this for almost 6 minutes. It later introduces into the song this slower, more lopsided riff, along with these extremely fast drumming, which plays into this really quick and groovy riff. You can find a large chunk of what they have to offer here, and it's all done with this extremely impeccable song flow. From there, things slow down a bit with the song In His Own Image, which starts with this really heavy and technical Meshuggah-style riff in the original verse. The song kind of feels like you're trudging through the mud, but you're also in this extremely panicked state to get out of it. This song has the most contrast between the slow and the fast parts. It mostly stays at this really crawling pace with these really slow chugs, and then it transitions seamlessly into these really fast-paced, intense drum fills. There's a lot of great use of the polyrhythms in these verses. The vocalist will be going at a certain rhythm, and it's totally different to this crazy slow chug that's going on. And it's really exacerbated at the end of these verses when he's saying, "We're bleeding the planet dry," with this really chugging riff. After playing with this slow, fast idea for a bit, it transitions into this really fast and ripping solo that, from there, goes into this mid-paced groove seamlessly. Give a listen to these first three songs, and you'll have a pretty solid idea of what's going on here. However, not everything here is as fast-paced and blistering death metal. There are a couple of palate cleansers with this quiet guitar passage called Wander after In His Own Image that transitions into the next song pretty well, and later in the album is a track called Lucid Intervals, which is this 5-minute instrumental that keeps things pretty slow-paced and smooth, and it reaches this very nice crescendo at the end. This album would be the perfect length if it had ended here at Lucid Intervals, but there are 30 more minutes left with the track The Illusion of Choice, which is this mammoth 3-part track that comes out to about 30 minutes long. This is basically Alustrium's answer to Rush's The Fountain of Lamneth, where they follow this person from birth to death, who experiences a lot of existential dread. They wonder why they're here and questioning if there's any point to their life. And this introduces some cool ideas that haven't been seen yet on the album. My favorite part, track 2, Eros, is peppered with these Eastern-style melodies and a bit of jazzy soloing, and the only clean vocals that are found on the album. Part 3, which is called Thanatos, seamlessly transitions from Part 2 and features a couple of Neobliviscaris-style passages in the middle of the track, with this really fast tremolo picking that are complemented by these equally fast kick drums. It's very reminiscent of their track And Plague Flowers the Kaleidoscope from their debut Portal of Eye. This eventually dies down into a smooth guitar solo, and it finishes on this huge crescendo with these spiraling rhythms and a really intense vocal performance, and it suddenly finishes off the album in a really quick bang. These three tracks work extremely great together. However, it's not quite enough to justify the extra 30 minutes in length. It would have worked great as a standalone EP released like before or after the album, but after 45 minutes of this really intense death metal, it's pretty exhausting to listen to. Overall, the lyrics are pretty critical and full of contempt. There's a lot of criticizing of flaws in society. For example, the atheist phenomenon criticizes these evangelical atheists for being just as bad as the evangelical Christians that came before them. They were once going around forcing people to give in to their beliefs, but now the atheists are a part of it too. It's new people with different ideas, but it's the same obnoxious and preachy behavior. It seems like a fairly fresh take on the debate as far as progressive metal lyrics go, providing a happy medium in this fairly huge point of contention by basically calling them both wrong. In His Own Image talks a lot about the destruction of nature by stripping the planet away and basically bleeding it dry of its resources. There's a lot of talk of how everyone is apathetic to it and becoming more lazy and lethargic, and just sort of letting these problems exacerbate because they're so absorbed in their lives. There's also Procreate Eviscerate, which criticizes the idea of marriage, saying, everything is great when you first start out, but once you're sort of legally bound to each other in a marriage, everyone is being drugged down like a deadweight stone. However, among all these lyrics is a big problem. While there are some interesting ideas proposed here, and there are some really nice stories that are told, they're very vivid, it doesn't really propose any solutions to these, and it's treated as more of just of a criticism. I can't complain too much, though, because this is further than a lot of progressive metal bands take it. They'll often write critical lyrics that don't really say much out of anything besides things are bad without really giving much of an idea of what's going on or much detail at all. This was a big problem on Laddermath's 2017 debut, which featured some really cool instrumentations and nice vocal melodies, but it didn't feel like the lyrics were saying much of anything outside of things are going bad in society without really giving much detail. Moreover, there are some really weird criticisms to be found here with songs like Slackjaw that talk about the idea of being normal psychologically, and it tells the story about a boy who was lobotomized. But this is a pretty dead procedure nowadays that isn't really done anymore in the mainstream. It certainly used to be a problem among these different medical circles, but it isn't particularly relevant in 2015. However, they do stray from this and talk a bit about dealing with emotions, such as on tracks like A Tunnel to Eden, which talks about basically using drugs to escape loneliness, or My Possessor, which deals with being totally overcome by anger and not really knowing what to do with it. There's also the 3-track part, The Illusion of Choice, which is someone going through their life and having all of these existential struggles and confusion and fear that comes along with life. Overall, this is one of my favorite death metal albums, with some extremely tight songwriting that seamlessly puts these parts together that seem so disjointed, and it just comes together perfectly. And it's definitely worth a listen if you're a fan of death metal or any kind of technical metal. What did you think of this album? Were you blown away by the songwriting here, or did you feel like there was a lot of unoriginality that sort of made everything fall short? I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. Alright, that's going to be it for this one. I'll see you guys next time.